to Senator Rick Scott, whose expertise, let's just face it, is Medicare fraud, responding to his apparent outrage over the Americans who remained in Afghanistan, some of whom, I should mention, did so by choice.
I just can't imagine ever in the history of this country our U.S. military would propose to leave a country without our citizens coming out first. I mean, have we ever done that before?
I do want to note that my family and I were in Cambodia until the very end. I'm an American. I was born in Thailand, but my father worked for the United Nations. And to answer my colleague's question, my father chose to stay as long as possible to help the Cambodian people as long as possible. And he left after American troops had left.
Mic drop. Today's hearing was also the first time that General Milley responded to the reporting from Bob Woodward and Robert Costa about the steps he took to ward off a potential preemptive strike from China out of fears of Donald Trump's recklessness. Reacting to intelligence showing that the Chinese believed the U.S. was plotting to secretly attack them, Milley spoke to his Chinese counterpart twice in an effort to cool tensions.
I am certain that President Trump did not intend to attack the Chinese. And it is my directed responsibility, and it was my directed responsibility by the Secretary to convey that intent to the Chinese. My task at that time was to de-escalate. My message again was consistent. Stay calm, steady, and de-escalate. We are not going to attack you.
While Republicans have accused the four-star general of going rogue, it turns out that those calls were not so secret after all. According to his testimony, numerous officials were looped in, and Milley even informed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows about at least one of the calls. Joining me now is John Brennan, former CIA director and MSNBC senior national security and intelligence analyst. Mr. Brennan, always great to talk with you. I want to play another soundbite for you because I think one of the big fears, at the end of Nixon, as he was spiraling, was that he would launch a nuclear attack, and that was some of the fears inside his administration that we later learned. With Trump, we've started to hear through all these books that have come out that people had similar fears about him doing something erratic and maybe mad in his last-ditch effort to stay in power. I wanted to play for you. This was an exchange that Mark Milley had a question where he described with Speaker Pelosi the risk of a nuclear launch.
I sought to assure her that nuclear launch is governed by a very specific and deliberate process. She was concerned and made various personal references characterizing the president. I explained to her that the president is the sole nuclear launch authority and he doesn't launch them alone, and that I am not qualified to determine the mental health of the president of the United States.
Yeah, does just the fact that happened frighten you as much as it does me?
Well, I think it was quite evident for quite some time that Donald Trump was quite mercurial and even reckless and was trying to do everything possible to stay in office. And so I think what General Milley did was exactly appropriate. He is, by law, the senior military advisor to the president and to the Secretary of Defense. And he was trying to ensure that the Chinese did not misunderstand what was going on in the United States. And the fact that he shared it with the Chief of Staff of the President, as well as the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, it was not going rogue by any means. General Milley, who is the exemplar, I think, of professional integrity within the military, was doing his job to keep this country strong and safe.
Yeah, I think, it's clear why people in the Trumpist right dislike General Milley. He's well-read, he's intelligent, he apologized for doing the Bible walk with Trump. He saw that was a bad idea. And they see him as quote-unquote woke because he has evolved views on race and on racial history. That's why they hate him. So here is one of the people with that backdrop demanding something that's absolutely silly and asking General Milley why he doesn't resign because he had a difference of opinion perhaps with the White House.
I can only conclude that your advice about staying in Afghanistan was rejected. If all this is true, General Milley, why haven't you resigned?
It would be an incredible act of political defiance for a commissioned officer to just resign because my advice is not taken. This country doesn't want generals figuring out what orders we are going to accept and do or not. That's not our job. just from a personal standpoint, my dad didn't get a choice to resign at Iwo Jima. And those kids that are at Abbey Gate, they don't get a choice to resign. And I'm not going to turn my back on them.
In your views, sir, as somebody who has had a very senior position in national security, what kind of country would it be if every time a general says that we should stay in the military theater and the commander-in-chief didn't do as he said, that general were to resign and call that a resignation in principle? Would that still be civilian control of the United States military in your view?
It would be chaos. And I'm quite surprised that Tom Cotton asked such an absurd question or made such an absurd assertion. There's no way that the U.S. military officers should be thinking about whether they should resign or not if they agree or disagree with the policy of the President of the United States. And I'm so glad that General Milley was able to explain exactly to not just Senator Cotton, but to the American people, the responsibilities of leadership within the military, which is to carry out the authorized and lawful orders of the commander-in-chief. Now, if a commander-in-chief was going to do something that was reckless or that was unethical or illegal, that's when the military officers stand up and say, no, I'm not going to do that. But in this case, I think General Milley and others made their views clear about whether or not we should leave Afghanistan. But once President Biden, who had to take all factors into consideration, not just the military ones, but the sentiments of the American people, as well as other factors, once that decision was made, General Milley and others did what U.S. military has done for decades and centuries, which is to salute and carry out the order to the best of their ability.
Because the person in charge is the President of the United States. Just to be clear, he is not, and no president is required, am I correct, to take the advice unaltered of generals inside of his military, inside of the military of which he is commander-in-chief. Is that correct?
That's why it's called advice. And that's why the president has to take in the advice of his military officials as well as the senior civilian officials. And then it is up to the president of the United States to make the best decision on behalf of the people of the United States. And I sincerely believe that Joe Biden did exactly what he thought was in the best interest. I might not agree with everything that was done or decided, but I don't have no doubt that Joe Biden was trying to do what he thought was important for the people of the United States.
Because we are still a democracy, at least for now. Former CIA Director John Brennan, thank you, as always. Really appreciate you being here. Up next on the Readout, former President Barack Obama is sounding the alarm on the importance of passing President Biden's agenda. That as he breaks ground on his presidential center in Chicago. One of his closest advisors, Valerie Jarrett, joins me next. Stay with us.